This is going to be a quick screencast of me teaching Zach about React.
Because I saw your first React video online and it was awesome. And it said part 1, but you don't have a part 2.
Yes, and that was duly noted because a lot of people pointed that out. They're like, why don't you have a part 2? I'm like, I'll make one eventually. Okay, yeah, so I wanted to do like just a quick video about how to architect React apps. So like how to create a React app from scratch, how to use React Router, how to do asynchronous data loading, and just like basic events, and just get like a better picture of like what you actually do if you're going to make a real React app, because you are going to make a real React app at some point, right?
Yes, I've already started a real one.
Okay, cool. Speak louder.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So we're going to create a simple React app with create React app, and we're just going to call this simple. Whew. So, all right, so we just made a create React app. I'm going to cd into it, right? Then I'm going to open it in Atom. Now, the basics that you need to know. So you know how like source app.js is, this is the like source screen, this is how it starts, right? And then there's this index.js that basically will render this app component to the DOM on root, right?
Okay.
And then if you want to load the app locally, let me make a new tmux session, simple. So I'll just show you like a very simple workflow for this. So anyway, you can do npm start, and that's going to start the app locally at localhost 3000.
For some reason I had to do yarn start, but I don't know why. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, Yarn's like the new package manager for JavaScript that all the cool kids are using, but I haven't actually started using it yet. But I will. I'm going to learn about it. But anyway, okay, so this is running a local build. But one of the first things I'll always do, like always whenever I'm setting up any kind of app, is I want to set up like a production workflow, just so like you don't have this issue of like, hey, this works locally, but how do I go to production from this? Like I always want to be in production from like step 1. So like you can't just like run npm start in production. You have to like what's called like build your app. So like if you look at the package.json folder or the file, right? They have this script, and there's an npm script called build, right? So like what we did, npm start, that's like you're running the start script, which is React script start, but you could do like the build script, which is gonna like build your app also, right? So I mean, you could have like an actual Git workflow for doing something like this, but I'll always like we'll just forget about Git for right now. But anyway, I'll just run npm run build. All right.
You're gonna do that on your machine?
Yeah, no worries. All right, you see like I do npm run build, and it's going to write files to this builds directory. So now there's a directory called build.
Okay. And
this is going to compile your JavaScripts, your CSS, and make an index.html page here. And this is what you actually want to deploy to production. Like you don't want to deploy, like you can't like run that server locally in production, right?
Okay. When you're running locally though, it's not using those files.
Right, it's not using the build file. So I could, screw around with this and do something that's completely invalid, save it. But if I refresh this, it's still going to work because this isn't reading from the build artifacts, right? Okay. So then if you want to serve this in production, you need to just set up like a very simple Express server. Like have you ever used Express.js?
Yeah, I've served on it, but not in production.
So you can do like npm install -- save, and then we'll do Express. Yeah, so we have an Express server. So now like all that's doing is just adding the Express, library to our package.json, right? Okay, and then you can make a very simple index.js. So the index.js for React is here. This is the actual React app. But this isn't like, if we deployed this to Heroku, it's not going to read from this. Like if we were deploying to Heroku, it needs to have like what's called a proc file, which tells us what the web process is.
That's kind of like a specific Heroku thing though, right?
No, this is like for most web servers or web hosting. So you basically, this is specific for Heroku, the way that I'm writing it. But anyway, we're going to have a proc file and say web node index.js. And I guess you'll see that in a second. But anyway, so we're going to make a new file called index.js here. And this is the code to run an Express server. Yeah. And right, so basically what this is saying is that we want to use the builds directory as to serve static files. So that if we don't, so like we're basically saying on any route, all you want to do is just serve the index.html file out of the build directory. And if this is referencing any other file at any path, because that's not going to match a route, just read it out of the build directory. But because the way that create React app compiles it, that will all work. So it's like what? This is a 14-line Express server. So we're going to have this in index.js. And then if we ran, for example, say we killed this and we just ran node index.js, that's going to actually run the Express server. So now this is reading from the build file. So now if I went to the build file and like messed around with it and like, commented everything out, now that actually will affect it and nothing will happen, right?
Yeah.
With me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, now if we make a proc file and says, if we're running a web process, just call node index.js, now we can deploy this. Like we could create a Heroku app and deploy this app just like it is and it'll run on production. So like, I guess we could show that just for sanity.
Sure, yeah.
All right, what is it called? Warm Hamlet. I guess we have to make a git, and then, so if I did git remote add Heroku and then pasted that in, like first build or whatever, Heroku master. Yeah, and like this should be a production build. So this, I always do this in every app, and I think it's a really good habit, is to have a production build immediately.
Yeah, I totally agree with that too. Otherwise, it just becomes like a game of trying to reassemble things in different ways.
Warm Hamlet. So I think HerokuApp.com.
Yeah.
Just so that didn't work because we were git ignoring the production build, so that wasn't getting pushed up to Heroku, which is why I couldn't find it. That's fine. The thing that I would normally do is have a production branch. So I'd have a different branch that on git ignores that. But basically, you're not committing that code to GitHub. So like on your master branch, you're ignoring the production build when you commit to GitHub. But the only thing you're deploying is the production branch. So then you can, so in the production branch, git ignores that. But just because we're using one branch right now, anyway, I'm just going to delete this. All right, so let's just take over exactly where we were. Okay, so if we do npm run build to build the app, it builds the app. We went to the git ignore file and we made sure that we are actually including the build and we're actually git build, which I should have probably noticed that that wasn't getting committed. But now I'll do like commit production build and then git push Heroku master, right? So now this is going to run the Express server. It's going to look at the built images and we'll have a production build, and I'll feel comfortable actually doing development work because I know that we're not going to have what they call integration hell, which is when you're trying to integrate your dev branch into production and things just aren't working correctly. But anyway, yeah, dude, so this is up on Heroku, right?
Sweet.
Yeah, let's go, baby.
All right.
Simple Express server, and all this code is going to be on GitHub, so you can just copy this app done when we're done.
Before you have the Express server, though, what is it using? Because like locally, it already is doing something.
I don't know, honestly, how it's serving it locally with the npm run. We could probably look, right? Because it says this script is React script start, right? So if we went into node modules, there's probably a module called React scripts or something like that. Yeah, React scripts. And there's probably a binary called start, right? So it is using node.
Okay, start.
Actually, it's probably in here. That's what we really want. Yeah, look at this. React dev utils open browser. So I guess that's what's opening the browser. So it looks like they're using just like their own kind of hacked React dev util web server. They're not actually using Express. But it's just whatever. It's some simple JavaScript web server.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, this is like in the depths of the React code. Hey, look, this is your boy, Yarn.
Yep, good stuff.
Yeah, so know what it is? Look at this, dude. This is why. I bet it's saying, like, if you have Yarn installed on your computer, use Yarn. I haven't even installed it, so it probably doesn't even try to do it.
Yeah.
But it looks at your computer. It's like, oh, he has Yarn. Like, let's use
Yarn,
that.
so don't let him use NPM.
Yeah, exactly.
Or make it look like NPM is okay, and then just have a bunch of errors, and the only solution is to use Yarn.
Okay, cool. All right, workflow, so we'll do npm start. And then something else I'll do, so I'll have this split screen, but I'll always have a process compiling as CSS also. So like, in this, we don't need this. In the source index we're importing this index.css.
Mm-hmm.
So that comes from in the top level directory structure. This is in source, which is, this should be here. But anyway, there's this index.css here, right? So the first thing I'll do is I'll make a new folder in here called styles and just get this out of here. Like let's put that here. And I'll change this to called app or something, like app.css. So then here we can just, this is just a relative path, right? So this will be, this is getting called from the index. So it's /styles/ or I call it app.css, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we want to compile SCSS into that. So this is super easy to set up. We could just make a new file here called app.scss. And like here, let's just do like body, background, color, I don't know, coral, right? And then you can do sass-watch./source styles app.scss and watch that into source styles app.css. And this is super, like, this is not using Webpack or anything. It's like literally just the Sass script locally on your computer to compile SCSS. And
you can install that globally, like npm install.
Yeah,
Sass?
it's a Ruby library.
Okay.
Sass is a Ruby library. But yeah, you just like do that in just your regular Ruby workflow, and now like here, now we have live CSS. So like if I change this to like, I don't know, green, we're gonna get a live compilation and then a live reload, right? So now
nice. Oh, because once the compilation happens,
yeah, it's going to trigger a reload.
React
so now we've got SCSS, which you always want SCSS. It's way better than regular CSS, and you want it like live reloading into your browser. So, okay. Next is let's blow away the index HTML here, and so something that I was going to show you is that basically every React app you need to set up React Router to do your navigation. So I was just going to set up like a very simple like thing where it's like a sidebar with like, I don't know, like 3 buttons, and you click on each of them and it like navigates to a new link.
Okay.
And like the process of doing that, like you need to understand this to build React apps. So, okay, cool. So let's install some npm libraries. So we can do npm install -- save. This is just going to put it in your package JSON, right? It's going to get the latest version of everything. So I'm going to do a library called events. You'll see why. Lodash, just in case we need it. Then React Router, which is the big one. Like that's the big one that you need. And then one called history. All right, cool. I think that's everything you need. But really it's React Router. The other ones I'm just installing because I think we're going to need them. But really just React Router is the key one. Cool. All right. And now, back in here. All right, so now we actually, I'm pretty sure that if you install npm modules, you need to restart this guy. Okay, so in this index, I'm also, this import app from app. Yeah, maybe I should deal with this. I was just going to put this, yeah, this is actually fine. We can just make an app that looks like this. What is it, /app.css. We don't need this. I'm just going to load the CSS globally. This guy, we don't need the test. We don't need these. We don't need this logo, so I'm just cleaning this up for a minute. Just going to put it in there. Don't need. And actually, I'm just going to delete this. I'm going to delete this entire thing that says app.js.
What does that do, though?
This is just the default templating for the app. So like, I'm basically just going to use this as the, so basically we're just going to make a component in here called app. Right? Something here, it's like class app extends component, and you need to then include the component here, like this, right?
Generally, that would just be another file, but for some reason you're not making it one.
Well, no. This is so this destructuring syntax. Basically, what this is saying is that there's a sub class on the React class called component. Okay. So I could just reference it. Like I could not do this and just do import React and then call this React.component. But when you use this destructuring syntax, it's like I want to take a nested namespace and require it as its own namespace so that I can just do something like that. That's basically what it's saying.
Cool.
Like, so it's part of this React library, but yeah, we just want to have it as a top level namespace like that. So now if I did just like a render function, very simple render, just like return h1 hello. Actually, we should split this out so that we've got a good view. But you can see that we have h1 hello, right? And basically all that I did is just move this into one file, which will make doing the React router stuff easier. Because, yeah. So basically, the key idea of React router, well, actually, before we even do React router, let's just set up the template so that we have a couple buttons to click, just so you can see what that looks like.
Sounds good.
This is going to be some fucking jujitsu CSS skills right here to really quickly set this up. But anyway, so instead of having an h1, let's just say we have a div class name, and let's say this equals app, right? So we have a class called app. And then we're going to have a class in here, so div class name equals app header. So basically what it's going to look like, it's going to be like a little header and then a left sidebar with navigation. So then we can do div class name equals app wrapper. And then inside the wrapper, we'll have app nav and then the main content, right? So then here, div class name equals main content. And the key idea here is going to be that the main content is where the screen, like basically, so, okay, so there's this thing in React, this.props.children, and that basically says, so this JSX is essentially a template, but you can put arbitrary info, if you say this.props.children, that's specifying where you want dynamic content to be loaded inside the template. So basically, this will be a component called app, right? Because class app. So if I did call it in React like this, /app, this is a nested component. The nested components that you define in the JSX, oh, no one will be able to see this because our heads are here. But I was going to say the nested components that you define in the JSX get interpolated as this.props.children. Does that make sense?
It's going to override that? Or?
Yeah, exactly. So if I didn't do anything, if I just did an h1 tag here and said like h1, this is a message, guess where on this app this is going to be if I looked at the source code. Like you can see it's inside the main content, right?
Okay. Oh, all right. So what is the props variable? It's just kind of this global thing.
Props, yes. So props, I guess that's like a core kind of idea in React is the difference between props and state. But basically, there's props is a way for you to pass data to a nested, like a subcomponent. So say you load data at the top level component and you want to pass it to child components. You would do that via props. State is something that's managed inside the individual component itself, so it's the state of that specific component. But if you're not passing the state to other components, and if you do want to pass the state, you pass it as props. State, so I guess one way to think of it is just state is local to the individual component, whereas props is something that can be sent from one component to another.
Okay.
The this.props.children is a special syntax in React to represent when you're using JSX as a data format, anything that you nested put inside, because remember, this class app extends component turns into app in JSX, right? So if we call this something else as the class name, the name of the component would be something else, right? That's just how the JSX works.
Okay.
And then we're saying in the render function of that component that if we want to nest some sort of data, you just call this.props.children to show where it nests. Because you can put arbitrary stuff in here, right? I could put a div with a p, p1, and then another p, right? Like I'm just putting arbitrary HTML in here.
All right, let's make the nav buttons.
Yeah, exactly. So I think maybe it'll make more sense as we use it. And let's get rid of this horrendous green background also to make things simpler. All right, so anyway, we're going to go ahead and revoke this, call this app. Yeah, and also some of this you might just need to play around with. Like it might just need to get to the point where like you have the concepts like basically explained, but then you need to just like mess around with it on your own.
So is this React DOM.render, is your whole app generally going to have just like one of those?
Yes, it'll only have one. And if you look at the HTML, so in this public HTML thing, this is the HTML that gets compiled with your app to build that build index HTML, right? So basically, this is just a template. It doesn't have anything, but it has a div called root, right? And then here, what we're basically saying is document.getElement.id root. So if we look at the actual rendered HTML, we have this div root, right? But we're basically saying we want to render a React app inside this static HTML tag. So this div ID root, we're getting a hold of it, and we're injecting this React app here that says app.
Okay.
That's why you see this thing that's like React root on it. So this is a React app. So you could have multiple React apps on the same page if you wanted to, and just inject them into different DOM nodes. For the purposes of this, the entire app is just one React app that we're injecting into one top-level DOM node. But you could literally have multiple React apps just injected into different nodes on the page if you wanted to.
Probably wouldn't want to do that.
I would agree.
Could they share data, or would they
No.
become a problem?
No,
Okay.
unless you did some weird hacky thing that's like write this to some top-level DOM component and then read off of it. You know, like
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never used multiple React apps on the same page. Just point as you can. Okay. So now we have this thing called this.prompt.children. So I was gonna say like if we did just some like super simple CSS here, so we could have the .app header. You know, it'd be like height 60 pixels, background color black, and then let's do width 100%. Right, that should work. So that should give us just like some black bar, and then I don't know like the margin and padding on the body. I don't want any of that because I just want it to be like very simple. And then like the nav we can just do on the left. So then we could do .app wrapper, which is going to have the nav on the left and the main content in the middle. So I'll make this a flexbox component. And then flex start, and then we want it to be display flex and then flex direction row is what we want. And then justify content flex start, align items. We could do stretch. Maybe that'll be easier for now. But anyway, and then we're going to have .app nav, and we're going to have .main content, right? The .app nav will just be like width 60 pixels, background color blue, and I think that should make just like a blue bar on the left column. Min height 1000 pixels. All right, whatever. We have some blue thing here, right? That's like a nav bar. Maybe this could be bigger, just like 100 pixels. And then the main content here, we'll just do like background color gray. Flex one, because that'll make it expand out all the way. All right, that's just basically flex. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that there's basically going to be a nav bar here on the left, and then on the right is where we want the components to be if we put them there. So like if I click to another nav, we want this gray thing to change, but we don't want the nav bar to change.
Right.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what you want to hook up the back button to
Exactly.
understand.
Exactly. Yeah, so maybe this is not the easiest thing to wrap your head around, but anyway, so then we'll do... Okay, so now we would just need to make a couple nav buttons. So like div, and actually maybe this will ultimately just become a screencast about React Router. I don't know. Like we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
My point is you're gonna need to know how to do this if you're gonna make a React app. So div.
We should just keep like iterating on this exact app with the next video until we
You could make
until
it.
we end with like an Ethereum app.
I know, right?
I'm totally serious.
Okay, so class name, we'll call this like a nav item. So let's put 3 nav items, and we'll just call it like screen 1, screen 2, screen 3. So we'll do nav screen 1. I don't know. Something like that is probably simple. And then we'll just have this be like a P. And we'll just call this screen 1. Do one here. screen 2. Screen 3. And then the nav, we're going to need to throw some CSS on. We'll need to make this a flexbox container, and we'll need to do flex direction column, justify content, flex start, line items, they can stretch, that would be cool. And then inside of this, sorry, I always need to keep scrolling down because our heads are going to be at the bottom right here. And then we can do dot nav item, I don't know, let's say height 60 pixels. We could make the background color coral just to demonstrate what this would look like. So let's just call these nav item. And now I see like we got these, and then we could do cursor pointer. Somehow this turned into a CSS tutorial.
That always does.
Cursor pointer, and then just we can make these a flexbox thingy really quick, and then flex direction doesn't matter because we're just going to center this. Column, justify content, center, align items, center. And then maybe when we hover over this, so I don't know if I can see this. So if I do and hover, so this is, or sorry, like this, and hover, we could just do background color, let's just make it yellow. So now, see how this works? We just got a little nav thing.
Nice. So when you click on one of those, do you see?
Nothing's going to happen right now.
Okay.
But the idea, just to show off the React router thing, is that when we click on one of these, let's at least just change what's in the content here.
Yeah.
And go to a new URL. So like /screen1, /screen2, /screen3. Right? All right. So this is another pattern that I use frequently in React apps, is I'll make a separate folder in this source thing. So we got styles. Let's make one called screens. I'll just make a folder called screens. And in here we could do screen1.js. We could do screen2.js and then screen3.js. So the simplest way to make a file, so these are just going to be React components. The simplest way to do it, you'd have to do import React, component from React. Then all you need to do is make class, and what was it called? We were going to call it screen1. Yeah. Extends component. Exactly like this, and all you need is a render function. So we could just have this render h1 screen1, called screen1 data. And then you need to do module.exports equals screen1. So far so good. Let's just copy this guy to screen2. Call him screen2.
Change the data.
Yeah. And copy this guy to screen3. Now in our index, we would need to import those to get a reference to it. So we could do import screen1 from / so we're here, so we could just do / screens / screen1. 2, 3, screen2, screen3, right?
Yep.
Cool. So now let's just, instead of rendering this.props.children, let's just actually, as an example, we could render the screen1 component, and we should just get something that says screen1 in there, right? Screen1 data.
Cool.
That's exactly what we thought. So we could do the screen2 component, screen2 data, right? So far, so good?
Actually, that's kind of magical. It looks like a...
Okay, so let's, we can back up. We can back up and think about it.
Just that you're able to say screen2 in there.
Sure, and the reason is because, remember, these are React components. So we make a class that's called screen1 as a React component, because we're extending component, which is the thing that's pulled out of the React library, right? Mm-hmm. This render function is going to define if you refer to this as a JSX element, which is that thing that looks like a DOM element.
Run render.
Run that. Basically take that and just run the render function. So what are we replacing it with? Just an H1 that says screen1 data.
Does it go through the whole cycle? Like if there's like other constructor functions?
There's a life
too?
cycle.
Okay, cool.
So it's not just calling render.
Yeah.
It's calling component will mount, component will did mount. It's calling the constructor function. It's calling like everything in that life cycle.
All right, cool.
But render is just part of that life cycle. So actually, normally what I'll do when you're doing something like this is you're not just going to return this. You'll make a div, class name equals screen, and we'll call it screen1. So now we have a top-level div component that we know is just going to be that screen. And remember, it only is going to take up this portion of the screen, right? But now if I want to CSS this and just say, okay, everything that's a screen shares the same property. Maybe I want margins around this so it's not pushing up against the edge here. All I could do is go to app CSS and just say, hey, anything that's called, I know you guys can't see this, anything that's called screen, why not just make a margin of 10 pixels on it? Now, no matter what I put in here, well, we're on screen 2, which doesn't have this wrapper. But if we did just copy this and put it to screen 2, right, that margin will apply now. So now everything that's a screen is just going to be pushed off there. Even if we were rendering screen 1, still pushed off because they all share that screen property, right? So basically, you are constructing, you have like permanent content and then injected content, which is going to be like the different screens in your application. But then there's permanent contract, like your navigation links. And you can make this as arbitrarily small. So you can have multiple React routers like navigating different components in your app if you wanted to. But this is just like a very simple layout to start with. Okay.
So we'll do the buttons, they're not interactive yet. That's
not yet. Step. Yes. So let's take a look at how, let's go through that. Okay. So we are on screen 1. And remember I told you you can reference it with this div tag here. So let's think of, so basically, maybe we want this to be dynamic. So instead of hard coding screen 1, we'll make something called active screen, for example.
Okay.
And now maybe we have something like var active screen, and we can have an if statement. And let's just make some number here. So we'll do var screen index equals 1. And we could say if screen index equals 1, active screen equals screen 1. So you can do this. You can set JavaScript variables equal to JSX DOM elements. That's actually something you're going to want to do a lot.
Okay.
So we could say if screen index is 2, the active screen is screen 2. If screen index is 3, the active screen is screen 3.
Would you put that as part of the render though? Or would it be like...
Well, this is pseudocode kind of. I mean, it's working code, but I'm going to build up to the correct way to do it.
Okay.
So I would assume nothing that I'm about to do right now is actually how you would do something like this. But anyway, I'm just trying to like articulate the concept here. So now if I changed one variable, I could actually change the screen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the screen that it starts on.
So actually in the render function, it's reading a variable, and then the render function has the conditional logic to say, based on this variable, I'm displaying this conditional data on the page.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see how that could be interesting. Okay, so now what would you want to do? Well, how about when we click a button, let's change this variable. Right, that would be a simple next thought.
Yeah.
So we have the div right here, and we can throw something on this that says, okay, so here's a good example of what state is. We might want to have state on this component that says, what is the active screen index? That's state that lives on the component, and we want to update it occasionally. So you would do that in the constructor function. So this is just part of the life cycle of any React component is it has a constructor function. And it takes an argument called props, and you just need to write this thing that says super props, and don't worry about why, just know that you have to do it. But then you could also define state. So we could say this dot state is equal to, and then the default state. So we'll say screen index of 1. So this is the starting state. This is just a JavaScript object that has keys and values. And we're going to have something called screen index, and it just goes to a value of 1. So now we don't even need this to be hard-coded here, and then this should just render the first screen. Screen index is not defined, right, because these things that say screen index, we want to say this dot state dot screen index. So we're reading off the state of the component. But now, because this is not in the render function, it's actually on the state of the component, we can update it. So one thing that we can do is we can put an onClick function on each of these divs. So we can say onClick, we're going to have a function, and let's just say this.setState, and we can do active, what is this called? Screen index, right? Screen index of 1 for this component. But if we wanted to make it on this component, sorry, I'm going to try to keep everything in view. Screen index would be 2. And then if we were doing it on this component, the screen index would be 3. So
I want to change those class names. They all say screen 1.
Yes, that's a good idea. Okay. So let's just see this work first. And you can see that if I'm clicking on it, it is changing.
Okay.
But now let's break it down, because I know that was probably...
Yeah, it already works. So set state is it's another like...
Okay, first off, do you understand the syntax?
Yeah.
This is just like ES6 function calls. Okay. So onClick is a function that it actually can take a parameter in it that's called event. So this is like the actual click event if you wanted to get like the target node or whatever. But then this.setState is just a function you can call in any React object that changes the state. And the whole point of React is that once the state changes, it will automatically re-render with the new state. So anything in the render function that's conditional on the state will automatically update. So here in the component, we're setting the state to the screen index that we click on, and then it's changing the state, and then all of a sudden, we have conditional logic in our render function based on the state, so it'll automatically re-render. Right? That's like the key idea.
Yep, makes sense.
Okay. So when you're actually, this is a pattern that we are calling this.setState from the JSX, right? Now, if you're building an app for real, I would be a slight like anti-pattern. Okay. Because in general, you don't want to couple your rendering logic to the actual direct, you've probably heard of these things like Flux and Redux and like these like JavaScript event handling libraries. The whole kind of big idea of this entire movement of all these libraries is that you don't directly update state from the DOM. You just abstract it out one layer. So like instead of calling this.setState, you would want to make some sort of function, for example, called update screen, right? And this would take an argument called like active screen index, and then this would this.setState. And we would then do screen index, what would we call this, whatever, new screen index. New screen index. By the way, do you get this, like this destructuring that I'm doing? This is something that...
Oh, no, that's syntax right there?
Right, so like normally if you're going to pass in an argument to a function, you could do it like this. Here, let's just start by doing it this, and you'll see. So now instead of calling this.setState, I'm going to call this dot, what did I call it, update screen? I'm going to call this dot update screen. And then instead of passing in this thing, I can just pass in 1, 2, and 3. Right? And this should still work. Well, I didn't spell this right. Right? So you see that this still works.
Okay.
But there's a big difference here, right? The big difference is that we're not updating state directly from the component. We have this one layer of abstraction, which is this function here.
Hang on, you took those curly braces off, though.
I did, yeah, because I was going to show you the code base in a sec. But the key thing I just wanted to show you here is that we have a layer of abstraction away from directly updating state. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because now we have this function that we update the state through.
So update screen can get more complex.
Exactly.
Those numbers would stay the same.
Yeah, exactly. Now the thing that I was going to show you is basically, so this is like just a known thing of programming, is like when you have a function and you have a bunch of arguments, they have to be in a specific order, right? Mm-hmm. And like that always gets annoying to me. I hate ordering functions. But if you just passed in an object of key value pairs, it wouldn't matter what order you pass them in, right? So one of the things you can do is you can basically say, and this comes from like me using Clojure a bunch, is like this is a pattern that you use in Clojure all the time, where just every single function only takes one argument and it's just an object. So then like the arguments are basically the keys on those objects. So this syntax here is just saying I want to destructure keys out of the argument. So I'm saying new screen index, but I could have another arg, but then it wouldn't matter what order they're passed in. It just matters like what their name is.
Okay. Is it doing something fancy, or is it just like am I just not seeing it?
So basically here, if I did update screen, so I'm basically just giving named arguments, new screen index and another arg, right? So here I would just pass in a map or an object of new screen index 1, another arg something. But here, for example, I could do this in another order. I could do another arg something, new screen index 2, but this would still work. And that's because it's just an object, and then we're destructuring the named keys out of the object instead of caring about
so
the
it kind of like takes them out right there in the argument.
Yeah, exactly. That's just an ES6 thing. That's like the destructuring something.
Got it. Okay, so it is like a weird syntax that I'm probably not used to.
Yeah, but I think this is a better pattern in general because as apps get more complex, function argument ordering becomes an issue.
That's a thing in like, that always becomes a problem.
Yeah, and the other thing you can do here is like, okay, optional keys, like I could get rid of this. Like it'll still work. You know, like try getting rid of a function argument and break your entire app, you know, if you weren't doing this. So I think this is just a better pattern. Okay, cool. So you saw how that would work.
Okay, so now we need to...
But here's the issue, right, is as we're going to the new screens, our URL isn't updated, right? Because this is all just being done in like the state of... So if I wanted to give you a permalink to screen 2, I couldn't do it in this current workflow. Yeah, I couldn't go back. Like I have no back button on my browser or anything like that. So, okay, so first let's just have the active nav on the left. Let's show how this would work. Like, let's just have this be like a different color, like red or something, if it's the active screen.
Okay.
So right here, right, all that we would need to do, we need to conditionally render a class based on whether or not it's the active one.
Okay. So,
for example, so this is just the thing with React is like if you want to make, this is just every key value pair on the JSX takes a string. But if you wanted to interpolate actual JavaScript code, you could just wrap it in curlies. And now this is actual JavaScript code. So this is valid because the string is valid JavaScript code. Okay. But you could do something like, hey, does the this.state.screen index equal 1? And if it does, I want you to render nav item screen 1, but I also want you to call it the active screen. Or else just render nav item screen 1. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So now you could put, you know, this little bit of CSS here that's like I didn't mean active screen. I think I wanted to call this active nav. So we'll call this active nav. And we'll say, okay, so this nav item here, but if it is, you know, the and.activeNav, then let's make the background color red.
Why do you need the and dot?
Oh, so this is just SCSS. So this is basically saying if you have the class nav item, but you also have the class active nav.
Oh, I thought it would, since it was nested in there, it would automatically do it.
No. So if it was just nested like this, that would be if your parent is nav item, but then you are active nav.
Okay.
This is saying like if you are just the same level as nav item, but you also have the class active nav.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so now screen 1 will be this, but once it's not the active one, it's gone. So I just need to add that little thing to the other guys that looks like this. Woo, that's not great. So we'll say if this is screen 2 active nav, screen 2. If this is cool. Yeah, and like I said, this would be helpful because I'm just going to throw this all up on GitHub, so this can be like end up being like a template that you work off of.
Okay. But I feel like, is that getting kind of messy there? Like, would you want to put that like line of code inside of class name there, or would that eventually get extracted out to somewhere else? You could extract it out to somewhere else. I think you definitely could. If you wanted to make a variable, it's like what the nav class name should be. But I don't think that this is that messy. Well, there's just like repeated stuff. But okay. Yeah, I guess it could be. Well, let's just. I mean, as we go, I think it's just a good thing to like. Yeah, so you could actually abstract this entire nav component out into a separate component that's just called nav. Yeah.
Right, and then you could include it so that this lives in its own file. I think that would probably be good code.
That would make sense. Yeah, the component, like a nav component.
Yeah, you should have your own component as opposed to like putting the nav in this exactly where the app is. Yeah.
So let's just keep moving on, and then like at the end maybe we could just start.
Do like a simple refactor. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, refactor stuff.
No, I'm down to split it now. Let's split it out just so you can see what it looks like because it's on my mind. So anyway, so we would make a new component. So in addition to screens, I'll normally have a folder called components. Making progress here. nav.js. Right? Remember what we need to do. Import.
Yeah. Import React and components from React.
Nice. Class nav extends component. And then we need to module.exports equals nav. And then we just need a render function. But now here's going to be interesting, right? So this is actually going to be good. I'm glad that we're doing this. So I'm going to take this entire thing and just throw it in the render function, right? And then we need to wrap this in a return block. And this is just what tells it to use JSX. Is that like a little return block right there, right? What's the issue with this?
It's not going to have the data it needs?
It's not going to have the access to this .state because the state isn't encapsulated in this component, right? Well, here's one thing we could do.
So we're going to have to use props? Is this where that comes into play?
Yeah,
okay.
Good call. So we're going to import nav from ./components/nav. So now we have that nav component, and we can render it here. We can render it in the app wrapper, and we'll just call it nav. And that'll render the nav component. But why actually isn't it rendering? Oh, sorry, because I did that instead of this. I need to render it. So, okay, so now I can put the nav here, right? And I can refresh. I can already probably screen index of null. So it doesn't have this state, right? Okay, so yeah, so now we'll see there's an error. Well, I was going to say we could actually, I wanted to at least show it render. So what we could do is do the constructor props, if we really wanted to, and just do super props, and then do this .state equals empty object, and this will at least work, so it'll at least render. But you'll see, like, this update screen doesn't exist. It doesn't know how to deal with that. There's no state. Okay, so before we click on anything, we know that it's on screen 1. We want to be able to pass in the active screen into the active nav into this component, right? That's exactly what you were saying before, where props does. So we can pass any arbitrary key value pairs into a component when we render it as a subcomponent. So we could say act or screen index. This should really be called active screen index, but whatever. And then we could do this .state.screen index. So now the nav will have access to a prop of screen index that's passed in. So here, if instead of this .state.screen index, now we did this .props.screen index. I did not save this, that's why it didn't work. But yeah, you'll see that this worked, right? It knows that screen 1 is red. Does that make sense? I know that's like a very, very core concept.
Yeah, that was
we
cool.
Just did.
Is it like passing it by value, or is it?
Props is always passed by value. It's never passed by reference.
Okay.
So props are always like a specific value to work with. But then if you change the state upstream, the props are going to get passed in again with the different value, and it's going to re-render.
We're about to have to do that, right?
Yes.
All right. So let's see that in action.
Right. So here's going to be another thing. Is like now we need basically some sort of cross-event or cross-component event flow, because you need to signal from this component here that you're clicking on update screen, or I'm sorry, you're clicking on a new nav button. But you need this component right here to know about that. It's in a different file, essentially. So this is what I said. Like, this is why these kinds of abstractions are really good. Because if we were directly calling state from the DOM, what would have happened is that when we put in a new file, we're in trouble. Because now that new component doesn't have that state. So that's why it's better to abstract it into like some sort of flow. But anyway, we still don't have access to this .update screen. So one thing we can do, and this is another like very important, I think, kind of concept of React, is the idea of like just event emitters. So just some way to emit an event upstream from a downstream component.
Okay.
So basically, we want to have some sort of top-level event emitter, and then every component hooks into it, and it can always broadcast an event to the entire system if it wants to. You call this like pub sub. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with that pattern at all.
Not really.
But the idea is that any component in a system can publish an event, and then anybody can subscribe to that global event bus and just say, if this event is called, I know what to do with it.
Okay.
So that way you can have
You
can have multiple components that all care about the change screen event, and they could all do different things, but they all just subscribe to it. And it's like if
that's a big thing I think that React must be solving, because
that's not a React thing. That's a general thing. But,
okay. Well, yeah, just dealing with like data that's like all over a page, that like you change one thing and it should change multiple things on a page, like and as long as it knows that it's subscribed to that data, I think that's useful.
Right, exactly. I would say React helps with that a little bit, but React is more like when people talk about React specifically, they're talking about like the rendering. They're talking about like how you render data from the DOM.
Okay.
But like when they're talking about like event handling, like there's other like that's like more like Redux is like what people are referring to. But Redux is like so overkill for just starting out. So yeah, I would not worry about Redux when you're just starting out.
Really?
Yeah.
I feel like that's like the next thing that we need to get into.
Redux? I don't know. I mean, I maybe I can spare anyone that's watching this that rant, but I feel like Redux is overkill for a lot of stuff, basically. I mean, I get why Facebook uses it, but they have like, 1 billion users. So, anyway. So one thing we can do, right, so let's go back to here. And I think that in the package JSON, I required something called events. See this guy here? Which is a library called events.
Mm-hmm.
And this gives you access to the event emitter. So I could import event emitter from events. And this is just like a library that Facebook made that just is like a very, very simple event emitter. So in component will mount, which is another lifecycle event on the main app component, we can say this dot event emitter equals new event. I think, so basically now we're saying this app component has just a property. Like this isn't state, it's just a property on it, just called event emitter. And then you can add like listeners to this. You could do this dot event emitter dot add listener, and you can listen for an event. So we could say the, like navigate screen is an event that any component could broadcast. But we'll just have a way to handle it here at this top level.
Okay.
And this will be like screen index. Like we can pass data with this. So we can say like, and this will take some data that is the screen index to navigate to. And then in this function, we could update the state. We could call like this dot update screen, new screen index, for example. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, and then on the component you call
we can emit
navigate screen.
Yeah, we can emit the event. We're not calling it because it's not a function. We're emitting an event.
Okay.
We're basically broadcasting an event to the system and say, hey, anyone that's listening to navigate screen, I'm calling navigate screen. Like I'm telling the system to navigate screen. And then because at the top level we're listening for it, we can change state at the top level. And if we've architected our app correctly, it'll propagate down to every component because we're just passing it as props what the active screen is.
Okay.
So like that's
kind of like Cascade.
Yeah, exactly.
All the other little renders.
Yeah, exactly. All the little renders get called downstream. Yeah. And that's like the key idea of React is like if you're architecting your app correctly, where you have data at the top level that everyone is just referencing and knows how to render conditionally, all you have to do then is broadcast that you want to change it in one place, and it'll just automatically reflect.
Nice. And it only re-renders the components
exactly.
that it needs to.
And not only that, it's only rendering literally the piece of DOM that it affects. So if you only have one, if your component's really long, but it only has like one H1 tag that conditions that piece of state, it's only going to render that one H1 tag. It's not going to re-render the entire component. which is like
really,
yeah, it's just sick.
That sounds kind of magic too.
It is. It's
so when it's calling this, so like this render function, even if it has like a bunch of components in there, or a bunch of like HTML tags in there, it just like only will know the ones.
So this is it uses something called a shadow DOM, where it will look at the state of the current DOM, and then it'll call the render function in memory to generate what the new DOM should look like. Then it'll diff them together and be like, what's the difference between these two DOMs? And then what's the minimum amount of DOM I need to inject to actually change it to the right state?
Nice.
So it can make those comparisons in memory, because writing to the DOM is expensive.
Much more expensive than just looking at the text.
Data structures in memory. So it does memory comparison, and then and this diffing algorithm was like one of the key things with the original React when they shipped it, where everyone's like, "Whoa, it's so fast!" Like it's because they were doing this like shadow DOM stuff. Whereas like other frameworks were like literally just rewriting the entire DOM the entire time.
All right, cool.
Yeah, so it's like super efficient.
So let's broadcast that navigate
screen. Right. So first things first is we need to give access to the event emitter to every downstream component. So this is where. So okay. So one thing we could do. This would be a very simple way to do this. Is we could just pass its props, right? Event emitter equals this dot or this dot event emitter, right? So if we just pass the event emitter manually to this nested component, now we could just do this.props.event emitter and we'd have access to it. So in nav.js, instead of this.update screen, you could do this.props.event-emitter.emit. And now we're going to emit, what was it called? Navigate screen.
I think so.
And then this is going to take, we need some data, and I forget what I called this. I think I called it screen index, right?
Yeah.
So let's say screen index 1, and let's just copy this. So messy. Fail. Yeah, I know I'm going fast with this also.
No, it's fine, because it's all repetitive. So.
Okay, does that make sense? So let's see this work, and then... Dun, 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 what did I do? Okay, yeah, sorry. So this was stupid. This should just be a function that takes this argument as the second argument. So it should look like this. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so here we go. This is working.
Sweet.
So now, it doesn't matter where we put this nav component. It's completely decoupled. As long as it has access to the global event emitter, it can just send the navigate event. And we have two things that care about it. This cares about it and this cares about it, but it doesn't matter. They both are getting it, right? So now we get the right screen here and the right nav here, and we're all in sync. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and we're learning React along the way, which is good. that was the idea.
Point.
Yeah. So now, okay, obviously we said these problems. There's no permalinks. We need to introduce React Router into the fold.
Right.
All right. So
you hit the back button, you'll just end up in.
There is no back button, and there's no permalink. Those are the two big issues. Okay. So let's want to take like a 5-minute break, and then let's do the React Router thing. All right, and we're back. So let's look at how you would do this with React Router. So remember that in the package JSON right here, I included React Router. That's the important thing. This is a separate NPM module, but it could be part of React because it's meant specifically to work with React. It's a separate library, right? So we're going to import router. Well, actually, I'm going to copy this import statement. Okay, so we're going to import router, route, index route, browser history, and link from React Router. These are all modules on React Router. Now, the key idea is that when we react dom.render, oh, and you guys can't see this. When we react dom.render app, instead of rendering app, we're going to render the React Router. So the router is going to be a top-level component that's even higher than app is.
Okay.
Right? So it's going to look, like this. Router. Okay, so now we're going to be nesting the app inside of the router. So, okay. So really simply, then inside here, I'm just going to do something, setting a prop called history, browser history. And then inside the router, I'm going to do a route, path equals slash, and I'll say what this means in a second, component equals app.
Hang on.
Okay, and just a note, I'm using the, oh yeah, okay. And just a note, I'm using the old APIs for React Router here. So I'm using greater than version 2.0, and for history 2.0.1. And I'm just doing this because I already have working code for it, and I think they changed the API in the new React Router, and I haven't really looked into it yet, but the core concept is the same. That's why I'm just using the old APIs here. But anyway, so I'm going to make a router history equals browser history, path equals slash component app. So the way that this works, okay, so back to your original question about props. Yes, the way that you define a prop on a component is you just give a key value pair in the JSX. So this is now prop of path, prop of component. And we're basically saying, okay, so we're going to wrap the entire thing in a router. And this history equals browser history means that, like, that's going to give you access to, it's going to create a stack in memory. So you know, like a stack data structure, what that is? Yeah, so it's like whenever we're going to push on a new route, we're just going to push onto the stack. But the browser history is going to give us access to human readable URLs that we can push the back button and it'll pop something off the stack so that we can go back. That's basically what that means. There's different ways you can do your history, but browser history is the most common. That's probably what you want. So then we're going to define the different routes that we can have. So we're going to put everything in this top level component called app. So basically, if we just go to localhost 3000 or if we go to our production URL, that is going to render the app component. And then inside the app component, we want to render other routes. And those other routes are going to replace this active screen here. Right? This is where we're going to need that this.props.children kind of thing, which you'll see in a second. So we can define an index route, and this is the route that it's going to go to if there's nothing else. So if it's just the slash. So for example, we could say index route component equals, let's say screen 2, you know, just so that it's going to default to go into screen 2. Now, this isn't going to do anything because our active screen is hard-coded when we load the page. But if instead of putting the active screen here, I put the this.props.children. Ooh, that's interesting. Now guess what? Screen 2 data is what renders here. So let's break that down super quick. Now again, it's because I'm saying the index route, if I go to slash, is going to go by default to screen 2. And then now this is the this.props.children of the app component route. So remember that was what I was saying about everything that's nested inside in JSX gets transferred to this.props.children.
Okay.
Now, there's a few things we need to touch on here, so I'm going to try to do this in a way that makes sense. So first things first, let's get other routes here. So we can do route path equals, you know, let's say slash screen 1, for example. And we'll make this go to component equals screen 1. And we can do the same thing for screen 2, screen 3. Sorry, screen 2, screen 3. That's so annoying. Text editor automatically kills the white space on save, but then it like makes things, you know, go out of your way. But anyway, so the way that this would work now is if I went to slash screen 1, you'll see that it goes to screen 1 data. And this is with the URL slash screen 1. But if I did screen 2, that's screen 2 data. If I do screen 3, that's screen 3 data. Does that make sense? Now if I hit the back button though, you notice that I'm actually going back in the browser, but it's also going back with the data as well. So because when I go to slash screen 2, it knows to render the screen 2 component here. But notice that obviously the left isn't changing. Right. But you see kind of now how just setting up this pretty simple syntax allows us to now use the back button in the browser.
Yeah, that's cool. Is it hooked up? It's not hooked up to the buttons yet though, right?
Right. So one of the things that we're going to need to do here is, so first off, the this.props.children is great because it's injecting screen 2 into here, but it doesn't have, the screen 2 isn't getting any props. It's not getting the event emitter. So we need to wrap, so like there's this thing that you need to do, which is like react.clone element. Actually, this is going to probably do it here, like react.clone element. And it's going to take the this.props.children, and it's going to clone this. and it's going to, I'm basically wrapping this with some sort of prop. So I want to wrap it with the prop of event emitter. And this will make sense, I think, when you see it like working. It's like this dot props, or this dot state, or no, it's this dot event emitter. So now, what you'll see, what you'll see that this is actually doing is this is just a syntax that says I want to render the child prop, but I just want to wrap it with some sort of prop. Okay, maybe that doesn't make sense. So let's try this. So if I do this.props.children here, and then on the screen1.js, oh, where was the on click here? It was on nav.js, sorry.
So can we go back to how the this.props.children thing works?
Yeah.
Because you're in the components, what component?
So I'm in index.js here. And actually, we can completely get rid of this.
But is the component just app? That's the name of the component?
Yep. This is the top level component of the app.
Okay. But then but below, what's that other?
So basically, this.props.children gets replaced by whatever's nested in the JSX. So it's going to replace it with component screen2. But I was just saying screen2 doesn't have access to the event emitter. And normally you want every component to have access to that event emitter so that every component globally can just broadcast an event if it needs to.
Is there just like one global event emitter?
There's one global event emitter, and everyone hooks into it. That's the idea of the pub sub. Like you can publish to it and you can subscribe to events from it, but it's one global thing. And it gets passed to each component as props. So remember when we made the nav, we're manually passing to this event emitter, right? Mm-hmm. But we want the screens to have access to it also. So I was just saying that if you're using this.props.children, but you want global props to be interpolated on them, you need to use this syntax of react.cloneElement. I know that's confusing, but I swear that's the most confusing thing that's going to happen. Okay, like it's not just, you trust me on why you need that. Okay, or something like that. Now anyway, now we have the screens rendering properly, but the nav is not rendering properly, right? So we need some way for the nav to know what the active screen is, even if you're just going to the URL. So one thing we can do, here's a very simple way that we could do this, right? Is basically say, because now there's a lot of ways to get to a different screen. You could navigate to it in the app. You could go directly to the permalink, not through the app. Well, maybe if we just put in the render function of the screen, or like the component will mount, just broadcast the event, hey, set the active nav to this. So now you know if the screen's rendering, you can set the active nav. So this is just one example of how you might do something like this. Is that in the screen, so I could say in screen1.js, or let's do screen3, just because that's one that it won't work properly right now. Like if I went to /screen3, this isn't going to be read the way that it should be. Mm-hmm. But if I said, like in the component will mount thing here, hey, whenever this component's going to mount, just make sure the this.props.eventEmitter.emit, just make sure that you navigate screen with screen index 3. And then in index.js, where we're listening to this event, we're saying, hey, whenever somebody calls navigate screen, just make sure we update the screen and it propagates down. So now, when I just, even if I go to this permalink directly, we see that this component piece is correct. So does that kind of make sense why we needed to make sure that this element had the event emitter, had access to the event emitter? And then basically whenever this component will mount, it can just event the event, hey, navigate to this navigation.
How does it,
so it's just
wait, what was causing screen3 to mount though? Just because you went? Is
the this.props.children, and in the router, because the route path goes to /screen, I'm saying if this is the URL path, the component you should be rendering is screen3.
Okay, so then when that renders, it also changes.
Right. So that's just one pattern. There's a lot of different patterns. That was just the first thing off the top of my head, but there's a lot of different patterns you could use to try and make sure that all the data stays in sync. Okay. I was just saying, okay, this is one, just like, hey, if the screen is getting rendered, just broadcast this event before it gets rendered, and everyone subscribes to this event, and everything's good. Okay, so we did that, and now let's just, will this navigate correctly? No. So now, here's the issue. When we're doing this navigation here, this isn't actually touching the router. Remember, it's just changing a variable in memory. It's just changing this .state.
Yeah.
So now in this update nav, and this is why it's really good that we abstracted this to a separate screen, right? So now instead of just setting the state to the new screen index, here's another potential idea. I'll show you the right way to do this. Import link like this from React Router. And this gives you a JSX component. So link is a JSX component. And instead of using the onClick function of the div itself to broadcast events, what you're going to do instead is replace the p tag with what's called a link tag. And then you give it the path that you want to link to. So we would link to /screen1. And then this would just say, screen1. Actually, we could just make this. Yeah, so now this is like a little link, and I could click on it, and it would go to screen1 and say screen1 data. Yes. If I click, so let's just do screen2. Link2 equals /screen2.
Is it essentially doing like the history.push?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's doing. I was just trying to do it programmatically for some reason. I was trying to make it simpler, and I think I actually made it more complicated. But anyway, so now if I click screen 2, I'm on screen 2 data. If I'm on screen 3, I'm on screen 2 data. Hey, why does screen 2 data not? Why is it not changing the little nav thing? Oh yeah, because remember this is this.props.screenIndex.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't actually calling update screen anywhere. It's just doing the browser history. So oh yeah, know why? Because we only rendered. So like basically that thing that we did, this component will mount on screen 3. We need to put this on all of them. And I actually think this is maybe not the worst pattern. So we'll just call this event whenever screen 1 loads, whenever screen 2 loads, and whenever screen 3 loads. And that means if these screens are loading, for whatever reason, it'll still broadcast the event and make sure everything's in sync. So now look at what we have. We have screen 1, screen 2, screen 3, and if you look at the URLs, this is actually updating. So like now we're at /screen1, now we're at /screen3, now we're at /screen2, and everything is updated, and we can go back, and everything will still update properly. Right? You see how that works?
Nice.
Screen 3, screen 1, screen 2, even though this is a single page app, right?
Okay, so let's go through like.
Yeah, so that was a lot. That was a lot. Yeah.
As far as like when you click one of those buttons, what is the order of operations, kind of?
Okay, yeah. So just so you say it.
Or maybe just when the page loads.
So yeah, so let's just load on screen 3.
Yeah.
Okay? So we load on screen 3. What's going to happen if we go to the index? It's going to go into this router, and it's going to match this. So this is like the same way like Rails or whatever, Django, matches routes. So it's just going to look for the first thing that matches and say, oh, I have a path screen 3, and I'm supposed to render the component screen 3. So the first thing it's going to do is look for a path. So these are like nested paths. So if like you do /this/this. So if you just do top level / this is the top level component app. So the component app that's right here is going to render. But then there's nested matchers here. So we know that we're going to nest screen 3 because this is what matches the URL. We're going to nest this as this.props.children. So it's going to nest inside of here. This is where screen 3 is going to render.
Is that like the only child of that DOM element there?
Yes.
Okay.
I know it's a little confusing, but I don't know what else to tell you other than just like think about it and wrap your head around it. like I don't know what else to say.
I feel like the more you see a pattern like that.
Yeah. So anyway, screen 3 is going to render here. Okay. Now screen 3 renders. This is the first thing in the life cycle that's called. So now it's going to emit navigate screen to screen index 3, which the nav is listening to. So it knows that this.props.screenIndex is going to like the event that is emitted once this renders is going to change the state, which is going to change the props that gets passed into nav. So now both components are going to be stayed in sync. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so now we have an actual route workflow where like I can, send you this link to screen 1 and it's going to render and everything will be in sync on the page. That's kind of the big idea there. Right, that's not so bad, right? Like this right here is like, this is like a template for an app like this. Now, I was going to show you, if you want to really quickly do an async data loading just to see it. I don't know if...
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let's do something really simple. I was going to say let's just ping any API, like super simple API, and just whenever, like, so whenever we go to screen 2, let's just load like the current price of Ether or something. I don't know.
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, so one other thing that I'll always have in the architecture is something called services. Services are going to be, you know, API integrations basically. This is just a common pattern. So we have component, screen, style, services. Yeah, this is starting to look like a little bit like a real app. So let's make a service, and we'll just call this Ether service, right? And this will just be the thing that interops with anything Ethereum related. So I'm just going to make a class called Ether service. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
This is just JavaScript class, and then we'll module.exports equals, I guess we could do, we could make this a new instance of it, right? So now we can just do instance methods on this class. There's a lot of ways you could just make a service. They're just isolated JavaScript, though. They're not anything React specific. Now, we're going to want to, one library I didn't include, so there's a lot of ways to do async in JavaScript. Probably the best thing you should do now is just use the async await pattern that comes in ES6. I haven't gotten that far yet. So like basically there's this promise war between these two libraries, one called Q and one called Bluebird. And these were two really popular libraries for doing promise workflows in JavaScript. And then with ES6, a lot of people are migrating to async await, but I still haven't gotten there. I still use Q because I think it's a really great library. But you can use whatever. Like the core idea is the same. So I'm just going to npm install -- save Q. You'll see, like the core idea is just the same idea.
Yeah.
It's just whatever syntax you're using is.
I think Bluebird is the one you see probably.
Yeah, it's the same thing though. I mean, like I don't think it matters at all which one you use. I don't know, some nerd is going to be like, well, technically, Bluebird is more optimized for multiple batch requests. It's like,
yeah, everyone's just going to say go to async await.
Get out of here. All right, no.
That's what we're talking about.
I was going to import Q from Q, right?
No, with Ethereum, actually, async await is pretty useful because you're just doing one after the other.
Yeah, so I mean, these are still promises. The async await is the same thing. I think it's just a native implementation as opposed to needing a new library for it.
It just does weird stuff with the syntax to make it look cleaner.
All right, cool. Okay, so yeah, maybe I should learn that and do a video about it. All right, maybe I'll do a video about async await at some point. But okay, so here we're gonna have some function like get ether price, and this is just on the service, right? And what the key thing here is that this is going to make a new deferred object equals q.defer, and we're going to return deferred.promise. So we're going to return the promise from here, and then let's just do like a set timeout. And we'll do some sort of function that will return or deferred.resolve, and we'll say that the current price is 44. And we'll get the actual price after this, and we'll make this run after 3 seconds. So basically all of this is going to do is just mock an API request and just return 44 after 3 seconds. So now like in our index, let's make this screen 2. So basically screen 2 is going to get the current price of ether. I'm going to clean up a bunch of these. Save. So on component will mount, so first we need to include the service. We need to do include ether service from, I think this is just .. /services / ether service. And we can do, in component will mount, we could do ether service dot, what would we call this, get ether price. And this is going to return a promise, so then we could do then as data console.log data, for example. We could do like console.log got data and then console.log data. So let's open up our little console here and let's navigate to screen 2 and wait 1, 2, 3 seconds, and then we'll see that we got data 44, right? So real quick, just do you understand the basic pattern there of like running a promise and then resolving it asynchronously?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like kind of straightforward stuff. I've made videos on my YouTube channel about promises before if you want to check it out. But okay, so now all that we need to do here, right, is in our constructor, props, super props, we'll make a this dot state equals, ether price, and we'll, start it as undefined. And then instead of just console.logging this, we can just update the state from the async call when it comes back, and we can do this dot set state ether price, data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now in here we'll do like screen to data, and then let's make a p. Oh, let's make an h4. Why not? And let's say in here the current price of ether is, and then this dot state dot ether price.
That's okay. So that's kind of interesting because on line 18, it's gonna when it calls set state, then it's gonna render like.
So the current price of ether is undefined.
Kind of motion.
Current price of ether is 44.
Nice.
So you see how that works? Like it's going to be undefined at first, and then 1, 2, 3, async call comes back, it automatically works.
Yeah, that's cool that it like re-renders now.
Yes, whenever you change the state, it re-renders. That's the idea. That's why we're using React and not jQuery.
jQuery.
Okay, so now just real quick to show you that maybe we wanted to pull from an actual API that would give you historical price data. So instead of just the current price of ether, it was the price of ether over time. So instead of resolving with just a piece of data, we resolve with an array that has day, April 1, price, 40. Let's just say it went up a couple. So April 2, April 3, 41, 42, right? So now this is just going to render an H4 tag in 1, 2, 3 seconds, but it's just going to be object, object, object. Really what we want to do is loop over that and actually have that render as sort of table. So let's quickly throw together like a quick table view. So instead of an H4 here, we'll have a table. And then really what we want is like the table rows. But we want to create some sort of an array and loop over it. So I'm going to import Lodash, which you use Lodash, right? Or you know what that is?
I don't know. I've used it.
It's just like underscore JS. Have you ever used that?
Okay.
It's just like a bunch of. It's like a port of the Ruby enumerable module into JavaScript. It just gives you like a bunch of like iterable functions to deal with like arrays and objects and stuff.
Got it.
But anyway, so you could just make a variable here called table rows, and then do like a dot each on this dot state dot. Well, let's call this ether prices now because we are, and we'll start as an empty array. And we'll say this dot ether prices is data, and then this dot state dot ether prices, and we're going to loop over this, and we're going to do a function as each ether price, and we'll just say table rows dot push, and we can push a JSX component into this. So we can do a tr on each of these, and say td, and we can do ether price dot day, and then another td that's ether price dot price, and then we'll render table rows. So this should actually work. If we give it a 1, 2, 3, it should render us a nice little table, which it doesn't. And so anyway, this table rows thing needs to be an empty array, right? Or else you can't push onto it. But anyway, so let's refresh this and do 1, 2, 3, and give us our table. Yeah, so anyway, now we have a table of the historical ether prices. But it's going to give us like this thing that yells at us, like, warning, each child in an array should have a unique key prop, right? And this is what I was saying, is that this like kind of annoying thing where you need to give a unique identifier to every index or every row in like some sort of iterable thing. So we could use etherprice.day here as the key. And now that's a unique thing that's on each row. But this will render. But you can see the pattern here of instantiating an empty array, then iterating over the state and pushing onto it as part of the render function, and then just rendering that nested in the table wrapper. And that's going to be really useful because this will just be an empty array if there's nothing in it. So like the function will just render. But once the state is populated, then it will render. So that's kind of the async workflow. The component will mount. You make the async call, and you just set the state when it returns. The state will update, and then in your render function, you're just like iterating over the state, and then this will just stay inside.
So it's actually rendering twice, right?
Yeah, it's rendering twice.
Okay.
Like if we put a little console log here, and this is actually kind of helpful to do in React sometimes.
Wait, it already did it twice?
Yeah, so now it's a third time.
3 times.
Yeah, and I think that's because maybe when some of the props got updated upstream, it recalled the render function. But that is actually somewhat useful to do. Oh yeah, tr can't appear as child of table because technically that's not even how you make a table, right? Like you would do it like this, where you have t head, tr, and then this would be th day, th price, and then this would be t body, right? So technically I was just like not doing that correctly. And now look at this table, look how baller it's gonna be, async. And you can see that, you put like a little loading indicator when things are loading. But that's the gist of async in React. It's like pretty straightforward.
Nice. That's some important stuff.
Yeah,
gorgeous little web page that we can make here.
It's pretty beautiful, man. Working navigation with browser history, async data loading to get mock API, but that could be a real API, right? Yeah. I mean, like this is components to building like real shit. So
sweet. I got you to do the second version of the React tutorial that the internet was complaining about.
Yeah. All right, that's part 2. And I've got way more tricks for part 3 and 4 if they ever need to manifest themselves. But in return for this is you have to make a Web3 tutorial. I mean a uport.
I will. Yes. We'll do React and we'll use what was learned here and just.
Well, I would love to put a uport integration into Decipher. I think that would be pretty cool. If you could show me how to do that.
Yeah, we might be able to get into that too. The library that made uport contracts. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, good looks. Let's go drink some beers.
Yeah, let's do it.